Picture this. Sicily, 1040. A heavy wooden coffin grinds against the stone pavement of a besieged citadel. Inside lies the feared commander of the Northmen, allegedly dead from a sudden fever. The city guards, relieved that the monster is gone, unbar the gates to allow a Christian burial. The procession moves into the courtyard. The priest raises his hand to bless the dead. Suddenly, the coffin lid shatters from the inside. The corpse leaps out, gripping a battle axe. He isn't rotting, he is roaring. Before the guards can scream, the funeral party draws hidden blades. The courtyard turns into a slaughterhouse. The city falls within the hour. This was no miracle. It was a cold-blooded tactical masterpiece by the most ruthless survivor of the 11th century, Harold Hardrada. To understand how a man becomes capable of such lethal creativity, we must rewind 8 years. Cut to Stiklestad, Norway, 1030. A muddy valley swarming with violence. Here, Harold is 15 years old. He stands in a crumbling shield wall next to his half-brother, King Olaf. They are outnumbered. They are surrounded. This isn't a glorious duel. It's a massacre. The peasant army crushes the royal line through sheer weight. Harold watches a warrior drive an axe into his brother's leg, followed by a spear through the gut. The king is dead. Chaos erupts. Harold swings his sword desperately, but he's a boy fighting giants. A blade slashes across his neck. Another strikes his body. The world spins and he hits the mud, buried under a pile of fresh corpses. He should have died there. But when night falls, he crawls out from under the dead. A local farmer drags a broken prince to a dark cellar. Harold lies there for weeks, his body knitting together, his mind hardening. The boy died at Stiklestad. The man who stood up was a fugitive with a price on his head. He cannot stay. Danish hunters are combing the valleys. Harold gathers a handful of survivors and heads into the Kievan, the frozen mountain range separating Norway from Sweden. They move like ghosts, surviving on tree bark and hunted game, crossing into the vast emptiness of the Russian steppes. They emerge in Kiev, the capital of the Rus. Harold presents himself to Grand Prince Yaroslav. He has no crown, no army, and no land. All he has is a scarred neck, a sword, and a total lack of fear. He offers his blade to the highest bidder. The exiled prince is gone. The mercenary age has begun. Kiev in the 1030s is not a refuge. It's a forge. Grand Prince Yaroslav the Wise is locked in brutal power struggles with the Poles to the west and nomadic tribes to the south. For a young Viking exile with nothing to lose, business is booming. Harold doesn't sit idle in the royal court. He takes a small band of loyalists and integrates them into Yaroslav's army. Here on the edge of the steppes, Harold learns a new kind of war. In Norway, battles were static collisions of shield walls. But the Rus fight differently. They face the Pecheneg, nomadic horse archers who strike like smoke and vanish before a counterattack can form. Harold is forced to adapt. He trades the singular obsession of the duel for the broader vision of the general. He rises quickly to become a captain, spending 3 years carving a bloody reputation across modern-day Poland and Ukraine. He becomes a favorite of Yaroslav. But favor does not equal status. Harold makes a mistake of falling for Elisive, Yaroslav's daughter. He asks for her hand. The Grand Prince refuses. The logic is cold and undeniable. Harold is a king without a kingdom, a prince without a penny. This rejection is the fuel Harold needs. If the world demands gold, he will get it. He looks south. Stories drift up the river trade routes about a city of unimaginable wealth, a place the Northmen call Miklagard, the Great City, Constantinople. The journey to Byzantium. Harold gathers his men, about 500 strong now, and prepares for the journey down the Dnieper River. This is known as the way from the Varangians to the Greeks, and it's one of the most dangerous travel routes on Earth. The Dnieper is a beast. It's wide in common places, but broken by 7 catastrophic cataracts, massive rapids where jagged rocks tear the hulls out of ships. To pass them, the Vikings have to beach their longships and drag the vessels overland on wooden rollers. This is the kill zone. The Pecheneg nomads know exactly where these portages are. They wait in the tall grass. As Harold's men strain against the ropes, the arrows begin to fly. The ambush is sudden. Harold doesn't panic. He organizes a defensive perimeter around the grounded ships. The shield wall locks tight. They fight back-to-back, heavy infantry against swirling light cavalry. Harold leads a countercharge, cutting down horses and riders with terrifying efficiency. By the time they clear the Seventh Cataract, known as the Insatiable, the river behind them is choked with bodies. As the coastline of Thrace comes into view, the horizon begins to change. Rising out of the mist are walls, triple-layered towering stone fortifications that stretch from sea to sea. Behind them, domes of gold glitter under the Mediterranean sun. This is Miklagard, Constantinople, the center of the world. Harold stands at the prow of his ship. He's 20 years old. He has survived the massacre of Stiklestad, the frozen force of Sweden, the wars of Poland, and the ambushes of the Dnieper. He looks at the richest city on earth and doesn't see a sanctuary. He sees a bank vault waiting to be cracked. Harold marches straight to the recruitment offices of the Varangian Guard. He doesn't join as a grunt. He arrives with 500 battle-hardened veterans. The Byzantines, desperate for competent muscle, welcome him with open arms. But let's clarify what the Varangian Guard actually is. Popular history often paints them as elite bodyguards standing stoically in throne rooms. The reality was far uglier. They were the emperor's problem solvers. When a province rebelled, when pirates choked trade routes, or when a mob threatened the palace, the emperor unleashed the Northmen. Harold is quickly dispatched to the Mediterranean Sea to hunt Saracen corsairs, Arab pirates plaguing the Greek islands. The clash is visceral. The Saracens are agile, fighting with curved scimitars and light armor. Harold's men are tanks. They form a shield wall on heaving decks. The Varangians wield the two-handed Dane axe, a weapon capable of cleaving a horse's skull. Harold doesn't just defeat the pirates. He annihilates them. He chases survivors back to their coastal strongholds. Here we see the terrifying pragmatism of the Last Viking. He uses terror. He burns villages to draw out defenders. When they surrender, he executes the leaders and enslaves the rest. But the most important part isn't the killing. It's the looting. Byzantine custom allows a commander to keep a substantial portion of the spoils. Harold takes this literally. He isn't spending this money on wine and women in the capital's brothels like his peers. He's banking it. He sets up a secret supply line back to Kiev. Chests heavy with silver, gold, precious gems, and silk are shipped north. Harold is turning Mediterranean violence into a retirement fund. He's arguably the first Viking venture capitalist, investing blood to withdraw an empire. By 1035, his reputation is soaring. The emperor promotes him to the rank of Manglavites, a high-ranking courtier. But the battlefield calls again. The empire's hold on Sicily is slipping. The emperor orders an invasion and sends his bulldog, Harold. By 1042, Harold has spent nearly a decade fighting for the empire. He's returned from Sicily and Bulgaria, not just rich, but dangerously powerful. And in Constantinople, power makes you a target. Emperor Michael IV dies, and his nephew Michael V takes the throne. The new emperor is paranoid. He sees the giant Norwegian not as an asset, but as a threat. He accuses Harold of embezzling imperial funds, which, to be fair, Harold definitely did. Harold is thrown into a dungeon. The Varangian Guard splits into factions. Those loyal to Harold storm the prison. Outside the prison walls, Constantinople is burning. The citizens have risen up against Michael V, furious that he exiled the popular Empress Zoe. Harold steps out of his cell and into a revolution. He doesn't run. He joins the winning side. He aligns himself with Empress Zoe. And Zoe has a very specific job for her favorite bulldog. The mob drags Emperor Michael V from a sanctuary. They haul him to the streets, screaming for justice. In Byzantine tradition, a man cannot be emperor if he is physically imperfect. To dethrone him, you don't have to kill him. You just have to ruin him. Harold steps forward. He holds the terrified emperor down. The sagas gleefully record this moment. The king of Norway, the last Viking, takes a blade and gouges out the eyes of the Caesar of Rome. It's a brutal, personal act of violence that cements his legend, but the gratitude of politicians is short-lived. Empress Zoe is restored, but she's wary of this ambitious Northman who blinds emperors for sport. She denies him permission to leave. Harold is done with leashes. He gathers his men and his loot. They seize 2 galleys in the harbor under cover of night. But there's a problem. The Golden Horn, the massive harbor of Constantinople, is sealed. A gigantic iron chain stretches across the water, blocking the exit to the Bosphorus. Harold doesn't turn back. He orders everyone not rowing to grab their heavy sea chests and run to the back of the boat. The weight shifts. The prow of the ship lifts high out of the water. Harold steers straight at the chain. The keel slams onto the iron links. The ship hangs there, balanced precariously. Forward, Harold screams. The men sprint from the back to the front. The center of gravity shifts violently. The ship tips forward, sliding off the chain and plunging into the open water on the other side. He raises a sail and catches the wind. He leaves behind the blinded emperor, the scheming empress, and the ruins of his prison. The mercenary is dead. The king is coming home. It's 1045. Harold sails back up the Dnieper, returning to Kiev as a legend. He's no longer the ragged fugitive who fled through the snow 15 years ago. He marries a lysive, finally claiming the prize he was denied as a pauper. But the real luggage is the gold. The sagas tell us that no man in the north had ever seen such riches in one place. We're talking about literal tons of silver and gold, the accumulated plunder of a decade spent sacking the wealthiest cities in the Mediterranean. He arrives in Sweden and anchors off the coast. The situation in Norway is complicated. The throne is held by his nephew, Magnus Olafsson, known to history as Magnus the Good. Magnus is young, charismatic, and has united Norway and Denmark, but his treasury is empty. Harold assesses the board. He can invade, burn Oslo and Trondheim to the ground, and take the crown. That would be the Viking way. But Harold is no longer just a Viking. He's a politician forged in the snake pit of Constantinople. He makes an offer. He proposes a deal that's purely transactional. He will share his immense wealth with Magnus, filling the boys' empty coffers. In exchange, Magnus will share the throne. They will rule as co-kings. Magnus looks at the gold. He looks at his unpaid army. He agrees. It's a bloodless coup. Harold literally buys half of Norway. For 2 years, the uncle and nephew rule together. It's an uneasy alliance. Magnus is good, generous, and liked. Harold is hard, stern, and feared. They are oil and water. But in 1047, the problem solves itself. Magnus dies. Some say a riding accident. Others say a sudden sickness. Given Harold's track record and his knowledge of Byzantine poisons, modern historians raise an eyebrow. But there's no proof. On his deathbed, Magnus gives Denmark to his rival, Stritzen, and gives Norway to Harold. Harold stands alone. The king of Norway is finally undisputed. Harold Hardrada. Hardrada. Historians translate it politely as the stern counsel or the hard ruler. But if you lived in Norway in 1050, you knew what it really meant. It meant tyrant. Harold brought the autocracy of Constantinople to the fjords of Scandinavia. He didn't want consensus from his chieftains. He wanted obedience. His first order of business is the endless grinding war with Denmark. King Stritzen holds the Danish throne, and Harold wants it. For nearly 20 years, Harold turns the Kattegat Sea into a dead zone. He doesn't launch a full-scale invasion to occupy land. He launches raids to inflict misery. Every summer, his fleet descends on the Danish coast. They burn crops, slaughter livestock, and shackle the youth for slave markets. The climax of this brutality is the destruction of Hedeby, the most important trading hub in the Viking world. Harold burns it to the waterline. But the real threat isn't abroad. It's at home. The Norwegian nobility, accustomed to the loose democratic style of previous kings, begins to grumble. The voice of this opposition is Einar Tambarskjolv, an old, powerful chieftain who dares to stand up and criticize Harold's constant warring. Harold invites Einar and his son to a reconciliation meeting at his royal farm. It feels like a diplomatic summit. It's actually a hit. As Einar walks into the king's hall, he senses a trap. There's a smell of treachery here, he mutters. The door slams shut. Harold's men emerge from the shadows. There's no trial, no debate. Einar and his son are hacked to death right in the guest hall. The assassination sends a shockwave through Norway, but it works. The opposition is decapitated. The remaining chieftains realize the rules have changed. By 1064, even Harold has to face reality. The war with Denmark is a stalemate. Harold agrees to a peace treaty. He gives up his claim on Denmark. To a lesser man, this would be a defeat. To Harold, it's simply a clearing of the schedule. He's 50 years old. His hair is gray. Most Vikings his age are dead or retired. But Harold is restless. He needs a new war. And as fate would have it, across the North Sea, an old man dies in a warm bed in London, leaving the throne of England empty. January 1066. King Edward the Confessor of England dies childless. With his last breath, he triggers a succession crisis that will shatter the medieval world. The English Witan immediately crowns Harold Godwin's son, the most powerful earl in the land. But far to the north, a third player enters the game. Enter Tostig Godwin's son, the brother of the new English king, and he hates him with biblical intensity. Tostig has been stripped of his earldom and exiled. He's desperate, bitter, and looking for a weapon to destroy his brother. He finds that weapon in Norway. Tostig sails to Oslo to meet Harold Hardrada. He plays on Harold's vanity. He tells the old warrior that England is divided, that the people despise Harold Godwin's son, and that the English army is weak. Harold listens. He's 50 years old. He should be looking for a successor, not a war. But the last Viking cannot resist the siren song of one final glorious conquest. He initiates the Leidang, the total mobilization of the realm. 300 longships gather, 15,000 men. It's the largest Viking force ever assembled for a single campaign. In September 1066, the winds turn favorable. The sails are hoisted. 300 prows cut through the North Sea. The destination is Yorkshire. The invasion begins perfectly. Too perfectly. The Viking fleet sails up the River Ouse, anchoring at Rickall, just 10 miles south of York. The earls of northern England, Edwin and Morcar, are young and inexperienced. Instead of waiting behind the thick stone walls of York, they decide to march out and meet the most experienced general in the world in an open field. On September 20th, the two armies collide at the Battle of Fulford. It's a massacre. Harold spots a topographical weakness, a ditch in a marsh on the English flank. He maneuvers his best troops to pin the English against the swamp. The English shield wall crumbles. The retreat turns into a rout. York, the capital of the north, surrenders immediately. But here, Harold makes a decision that baffles the modern mind. He does not occupy the city. He wants to rule England, not sack it. He agrees to a peaceful exchange. The city will give him hostages, and he will not let his 15,000 savage warriors inside the city walls. They agree to meet for the exchange at Stamford Bridge, Monday, September 25th, 1066. It's a beautiful, freakishly hot autumn day. Harold looks at the weather and makes the call that seals his fate. Leave the mail shirts, he orders. The heavy chain mail, weighing 30 pounds each, are left in heaps on the decks of the ships at Rickall, miles away. The Viking army marches to Stamford Bridge feeling like tourists. They're relaxed. They're laughing. They believe the war is effectively over. As they lounge by the River Derwent, waiting for the hostages from York to arrive, they see a cloud of dust rising on the western horizon. Then comes a glint of sun on steel. Harold Hardrada has been outplayed. King Harold Godwin's son has done the impossible. He's marched his army nearly 200 miles in 4 days. He hasn't just come to talk. He's brought the entire English army, fully armored, fully rested, and furious. The Vikings are split in two by the river. They're unarmored, they're outnumbered, and they're completely surprised. Harold turns to Tostig. We could retreat to the ships, Tostig suggests, panic rising. Harold looks at the English army thundering toward them. The hard ruler does not run. He plants his banner in the ground. He sends 3 fast riders back to the fleet to call for reinforcements, knowing they will never arrive in time. Then he forms a circle. The Battle of Stamford Bridge, the end of the Viking Age, is about to begin. The English army crashes into the Viking vanguard on the west bank. It's a slaughter. The Vikings, unarmored and unprepared, are pushed back into the river. The water turns red within minutes. The survivors scramble across the narrow wooden bridge, but the English pursuit is halted by a single man. A lone Viking warrior, a giant of a man, plants himself in the middle of Stamford Bridge. He wields a massive Dane axe. For an hour, this anonymous berserker holds back the entire English army. He kills 40 men. Finally, an English soldier floats down the river in a half-barrel and thrusts a spear up through the wooden planks. The spear pierces the Viking's groin. The giant falls. The bridge is open. As the English army pours across, there's a pause. A rider rides out from the English lines. It's King Harold Godwin's son himself. He rides up to his brother Tostig and offers him peace, his earldom and a third of the kingdom. Tostig pauses. He asks, "And what will you give my ally, King Harold of Norway?" The rider looks at the giant Norwegian king. "We will give him 7 feet of English ground," he replies famously, "or perhaps a little more, seeing as he is taller than other men." The negotiation ends. The battle begins. Harold Hardrada, 50 years old, without his chainmail, orders the war arrow to be shot. He detaches from the safety of the shield wall. He charges. Without armor, he's faster, lighter. He wields a sword with 2 hands, hacking through the English lines. For a moment, it looks like he might actually win. The English line buckles under the sheer ferocity of his assault. But this is not a saga. This is reality. And in reality, unarmored flesh cannot withstand missile fire. At the height of the charge, a stray arrow hisses through the air. It's not a noble duel that kills him. It's random chance. The arrow strikes Harold squarely in the throat. The king of Norway stops. The thunderbolt of the north falls to his knees. He chokes on his own blood, gasping for air that will not come. He collapses onto the 7 feet of English ground he was promised. The fighting stops for a heartbeat. Tostig rushes to the fallen king. The English offer surrender again, but the Vikings, seeing their leader dead, do not surrender. They scream a war cry and charge again. They choose to die around their king rather than live as prisoners. The death of Harold Hardrada does not stop the killing. It accelerates it. Viking reinforcements from the ships finally arrive, miles too late and exhausted. They throw themselves into the fray in a suicidal frenzy. They fight until they're literally too tired to lift their axes. By sunset, Tostig Godwin's son is dead. The field is silent. The 1066 invasion is over. Of the 300 magnificent longships that sail from Norway with dreams of empire, only 24 needed to carry the survivors home. It's a demographic catastrophe. A generation of Norwegian men lies rotting in the English mud. King Harold Godwin's son has won a miraculous victory, but history is cruel. While Godwin's son is celebrating in York, the wind changes. 3 days after the battle, William of Normandy lands on the undefended southern coast of England. Godwin's son is forced to march his battered, exhausted army all the way back south. He meets William at Hastings 3 weeks later. His men are tired. His best warriors are dead in Yorkshire. He loses. Here lies the true legacy of Harold Hardrada. He did not conquer England, but he was the reason England was conquered. He was a hammer that softened the English steel, so the Norman anvil could break it. Without Stamford Bridge, there is no Hastings. Without Hastings, the English language, culture, and history, as we know them, do not exist. Harold's body was eventually returned to Norway. He was buried in Trondheim, then later moved. His final resting place lost renovations and time. A fitting end for a wanderer. With his death, the Viking Age effectively snapped shut. The era of the Sea Kings, of massive fleets carving out empires, died with Harold. The North turned inward. Scandinavia became a land of Christian kingdoms, ties, and bureaucracy. Harold Hardrada was an anachronism, a man born too late. He tried to force the world to be what it used to be, to live by the old code of blood and iron in a world that was moving toward feudalism and written laws. He was the ultimate adventurer, a teenage exile, a Russian commander, a Byzantine guard, a desert raider, a Norwegian king. He chased the horizon until the horizon finally caught him. In the end, he got exactly what he promised his enemies, 7 feet of ground. But in those 7 feet, he buried an entire age. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the life of the last Viking, don't forget to like and subscribe to keep history alive.